This is episode 103 of the Magic Detective Podcast. On this episode, you'll hear about the life of Harry SEARS, the real Vanishing Man. That and more on this episode of the Magic Detective Podcast. Hello and welcome to the Magic Detective Podcast, your podcast home for magic history. I'm your host, Dean Carnegie. I am the Magic Detective, and this is episode 103. So I'm finally back at it. I had to stop work on this particular episode several weeks ago, actually over a month ago now. I'd been on the road for about 6 weeks doing shows, and I had a really hectic schedule and an even tougher bunch of incidents that took place during the tour. Thankfully, all the shows went well, but it was just impossible to work on the podcast. There was information I was missing, so I just decided to wait till I returned. And of course, while I was gone, several things happened. One of those that happened was William Rauscher passed away. He was such a prolific writer and author, and I only had the honor of seeing him lecture in person one time, and that was at the Yankee Gathering a few years ago when he lectured on Calenag. I'm constantly amazed at the number of books he has written for the magic world. These are just incredible biographies of the known and some lesser known performers, and his books are among some of my all-time favorites. I think two of my favorites of his are the Surveillance Roy book that he did along with Mike Caveney, and the Houdini Code book, which I just love, which was again done through Mike Caveney's publishing company. Those books are eye-openers and so filled with valuable information. The magic history world and the world in general is a lesser place without William Rauscher. May he rest in peace. Another bit of news that you may have already heard about, Julie Eng from Magic Anna will now be the new executive director of Genie Enterprises. In addition, Jim Steinmeier has been made the executive editor of Genie Magazine. Richard Kaufman will stay on until January, and then the new group takes over. Richard is busy working on an updated version of Greater Magic, so I think he has more than his hands full. And from what I understand, he will remain with the magazine, but working on the magic column within the magazine. All of this is part of Randy Pitchford's new vision for Genie and the Magic Castle, so we have good magic times ahead. By the way, if you get a chance, my friend Judge Gary Brown has a new book on the market, and his last book, Wandcraft, was a big hit, and his new book is called The Inventive Magician's Handbook with Props. Did you catch that? It comes with props. Now, when was the last time you purchased a professional magic book and you actually got the props with it? Maybe a beginner's book, maybe. But I can't recall an actual serious magic book that came with all the props. Now, I've not yet seen the book, but I am familiar with the number of the props and the effects that are in the book. In some instances, actually, I had the honor of talking to Gary during their creation. And I had, by the way, I had nothing to do with their creation. It was all Judge Brown. But there are some very clever effects. I know that there's a great Christmas trick for adults, and and I'll leave it at that. There's a crazy trick with a clairvoyant chicken. There's so many cool things, and it just runs the gamut of types of magic. You're just going to absolutely love it. And the book is going to help you become more inventive, more creative yourself. So you just can't go wrong. I've not seen the book yet, but from what I understand, it is highly illustrated. So there's just so much visual excitement to the book as well. I know you're going to love it. Gary always puts out great books, and he works, of course, along with his publisher, Larry Haas, who just does an excellent job. So here's the deal. The book officially goes on sale October the 1st, and I think they were having a pre-sale And I think they may have stopped that already because they were selling out faster than they expected. But here's how you get the book. There's only one place to go to get the book, and here's how you get it. You go to this website, theoryyandartofmagic.com. Let me say that again. theoryyandartofmagic.com, and look up the Inventive Magician's Handbook with props. You'll be happy you ordered it. You're just going to love it. Like I said, it comes out October 1st. It's going to be fantastic. Okay, so if I asked you to name a magician who had an extremely successful career and then suddenly all but vanished, who might you name? I can think of a couple people actually. But today's podcast is about someone who vanished and yet had a very interesting second career. So here we go. Our feature today is Harry SEARS. He was born Harry S. Knight, December 28, 1885, in Washington, D.C. He appears to be the only son of William and Grace Knight. The Knight family can be traced back to living in America as far back as the 1600s. Seems the first Knight to be born in America was named Charles. His parents are not listed on board the Mayflower, but were in Massachusetts very shortly thereafter. Now, Harry, though being born in the nation's capital, Washington, D.C., actually grew up in the Philadelphia area. And I haven't been able to find out who inspired his interest in magic, but given the location, it could have been any number of magicians. My money's going to be on Harry Keller. The earliest description of young Harry SEARS comes from a January 19th, 1924 issue of the Billboard in the column called Magical Highways and Byways by Adam Hull Shirk, who at the time was president of the Los Angeles Society of Magicians. He writes, "I saw him perform when I was but a boy, and he was too. He was a clean-cut fellow with a nice manner and charming personality. At the time, his magic was of the small order and included, among other effects, the rising wand, which in his hands was superior." The first time Harry shows up in the magic periodicals, his name is listed as Harry SEARS Knight, and he's a mere 18 years old. This was the July 1903 issue of Mahatma, and it says, "At Keith's, Harry SEARS Knight, a young Philadelphian, makes his debut as a magician." So this was no doubt his first big-time vaudeville appearance. A short time later, he appeared in the magazine again. This time it describes his future in magic to be very promising. Also, through Mahatma, we learn that Harry is using an Aga levitation, or an Aja levitation, in his act. Here is what they have to say. At Woodside Park, SEARS, the magician, presents the Aja levitation in a manner that is to be desired. It is the best Aja that I have ever seen, and done in such a neat, clean, and mysterious manner that it is the subject of much comment among the patrons of the park. SEARS is a young magician who, in my estimation, has a brilliant future ahead of him. He possesses address, skill, and ambition, and I predict he will someday be in the future rank of the workers in this noble art of magic. He is adept in the art of advertising, and you hear of his palace of mystery as soon as you get inside the park. It may not be amiss to add that the Aga levitation, or Aja levitation, was built by the New York Magical Company, who had built the Aja now being exhibited in Atlantic City. Truthfully speaking, it is by far superior to any levitation which has caused a sensation in New York that can be called absolutely new. As I mentioned, the Aga or Aja is a type of levitation illusion. Magicians often have many methods to create a specific illusion, and Aga or Aja, I never know which is the proper way to pronounce that, just refers to a specific type of levitation. And by all accounts, he had improved the method and was really enjoying a lot of success with it. Now, we come to the 1906 Conjurer's Monthly Magazine, and reports are that Sears is now performing in England. In May 1907, Conjurer's Monthly Magazine, Sears has just gone through Chicago with his big act. He has 5 assistants and a carload of baggage. Watch out, Golden, for this fellow will soon beat your baggage record. June 1907, Conjurer's Monthly Magazine, Houdini reports that Sears is now performing the Suspended Trunk Mystery at the Keith's Proctor Harlem Theater. He adds that Charles de Vere first introduced this effect to American audiences, and Horace Golden has been trying to prevent others from presenting it. This effect in full features a large cannon. A female assistant is placed inside the cannon, and then it is pointed towards a large box hung high from the theater ceiling. The cannon is fired, a huge explosion is heard, a blast of fire and smoke shoot out of the cannon, and suddenly the box is seen to move and twist as if something has hit it. The box is lowered, and inside is another box. That box is opened to display yet another inner box. The third box is opened, and out pops the assistant that was previously placed into the cannon. A wonderful illusion. The magazine also points out that the cannon part of the mystery was first introduced to the stage by Frederick Eugene Powell. Mr. Powell will be a feature in an upcoming episode of this podcast, by the way. September 1907, Conjurer's Monthly Magazine. Sears is still touring the United States to great acclaim, and then he takes his show to Canada and does very well there. And next stop, England. Now, the Conjurer's Monthly Magazine has been very good to Sears until now. But upon an appearance in England, a British newspaper quotes Sears as having performed a handcuff and straitjacket act in America. And the Conjurer's Monthly Magazine is quick to refute those facts, even pointing out that Variety newspaper had reported what was in Sears's show earlier in the year, and there was no mention of any escape material. Sears was often compared to Horace Golden, the illusionist. In a July 22, 1907 Keith's advertisement, it has this promotion. Up-to-date sensation, the great Sears European illusionist. And I suppose the mistake was easy to make. He was an American after all, but he'd been performing for some time in England and headlining everywhere he went. In 1907, 08, he was mostly in England. In 1909, Sears took his show over to Italy. Next, from the pages of Stanion's Magic, October 1908, we have a review of Sears from the London Hippodrome when he appeared there the month before. And I'm going to edit some of this, as Stanion has a habit of trying to describe how particular effects work. Another he's exposing the tricks, and I don't give away secrets on the podcast, only history. And it goes like this. The show begins with a curtain that rises, showing the stage very well furnished with apparatus. First comes the production of 2 assistants inside a cabinet. The performer, appearing with a rush, calls attention to a large cabinet in center stage. Cabinet, square-shaped and mounted on 4 short legs, is provided with no less than 8 doors, a pair of doors opening in the center on each side of its 4 sides. Sears begins by opening the 8 doors, those at the rear the last to open. You can clearly see everywhere. There's nothing to see inside. He next jumps into the cabinet and he runs around and shows that all is clear. And now he gets out and he closes all the doors. Next, all the doors are opened and a lady appears and jumps out of the cabinet. Then a male assistant is produced in exactly the same manner. The next act begins with a barrel without ends, which is turned about for inspection, then placed on a low stand. From one end, the barrel is covered with paper and held in place with a metal band. The barrel is turned, rear end now in front, closed with paper in the same manner, and then another assistant then bursts from apparently an empty paper-covered barrel in a grand display. This was known at the time as the barrel of Diogenes. Next, a pretty spectacular effect in the form of illuminated spider webs that were center stage. A lady mounts the center of the web and instantly disappears. That's interesting. Now, a personality piece or an in-one routine is presented, the thumb tie. SEARS steps into the arena in search of a couple of volunteers. 2 pieces of string about 15 inches long, a long stick, and a steel ring are handed out for examination. His thumbs are also inspected. His thumbs are now crossed, and 1 piece of string ties both thumbs together. A second cord goes around in the opposite direction and again ties the thumbs together. The walking stick is held in a vertical position by a spectator, one hand near the top, one near the bottom. The ring is held by the other spectator. SEARS pushes his hands against the stick and somehow penetrates it and finds himself linked in this position. In other words, his thumbs are still tied. He pushes against it with his thumbs, and now, even though he's past the stick, his thumbs are still tied. The other spectator now tosses the ring to SEARS, who catches it, and it likewise becomes linked on his arm. And it should be pointed out the thumbs are tied the entire time. Next, he frees himself from the walking stick and the steel rings. SEARS then instructs the 2 people on stage to both clasp their hands together, making sort of a makeshift hoop or loop. And before they have time to think, SEARS has linked himself onto their arms. Strong magic continues with the materialization of a girl from the performer's side. This is a rather strange one. SEARS sits upon a low stool, and a spirit form of a lady slowly emerges from his side, head first, and moving upwards at sort of a 45-degree angle. Both performers step out, and the lady exits the stage. Next, we have 3 leather cases, each in the form of a drain pipe provided with a lid, the smallest one being big enough to hold a lady, and they're shown each being empty. They are then nested together and then swung in the air, or hung in the air. A square canopy, just large enough to hold 1 person standing, has now stood over a carpet in front of a 4-fold screen. The entire thing is now enclosed by the 4-fold screen. There is 1 door in the front of this screen that allows SEARS to step into this makeshift cabinet. He quickly shows that it is empty, and then he exits. A male assistant steps into the cabinet, and the door is closed. Then the entire thing is hoisted into the air. A small door opens during the process, allowing the audience to see the boots of the male assistant. Then that door is closed. SEARS fires a pistol, which was common practice at this time, and the cabinet lowers. Now inside is a female assistant, and the male is produced from a cabinet far downstage from this action. By the way, the pistol was a starter pistol, and it was used for the sound and the dramatic effect. Think of it as kind of taking the place of the magician saying abracadabra. In the final sequence, a female assistant mounts a pedestal. She's given a large umbrella to shake about, and suddenly the umbrella falls to the floor and the lady has vanished. Next, the nest of 3 leather cases is lowered. The outer one is opened and the 2 inner ones removed. Next, the next one is opened and the final one is removed. Then finally, the last one, the lady is produced from that one to a huge applause. And there's an encore. The lady put into a square box with a lid on all 4 sides, all lids hinged at the bottom. Lids closed and the box put on a table. Box hoisted in the air, pistols fired, doors fall open, the box is empty, the lady appears in a cabinet set near the wings. Tremendous and well-deserved applause follows. Sounds like a great show. And that encore sounds familiar to me. It sounds like something that Doug Henning did on one of his specials where he had an assistant get in a box and it was raised in the air, and then suddenly the sides all fell down, showing the box empty, and the girl appears somewhere else. That's what it sounds like to me. Anyway, let's get back to the story. In 1910, Harry Sears takes out his most ambitious project, a show that he called the Blue Pearl. From the pages of the Magical World periodical, it says, quote, "This majestic spectacle employs no less than 45 people in its action, while elephants, camels, horses, snakes, and more help to create an atmosphere of Oriental realism. The show is good and likely to prove a popular success." The great Lafayette, born Sigmund Neuberger, perished in a theater fire on May 9, 1911. Sears and Lafayette were performing during the same time. They were friendly competitors, and Sears was often compared to Lafayette. When Lafayette perished in the fire, Sears and his entire troupe attended the funeral, and at a later date, they all made a pilgrimage to the grave of Lafayette in Edinburgh. Sears, during his career, had been compared to Carl Hertz, Horace Golden, the great Lafayette, and more, all strong performers in their own right, which makes me believe that Sears himself was just as competent a performer as those gentlemen, and he was clearly ambitious. Let's look again at the Blue Pearl, and this comes from the pages of the Magical World periodical. The Blue Pearl, a mystical pantomimic fantasy in 5 scenes. Scene 1 discloses a busy bazaar in the principal streets of Benares. Merchants selling their wares, customers buying, devotees, fakirs, dancers, natives, guards, etc. The scene had an absolute scent of the East. It was so realistic. In this scene, one of the natives gave imitations of animals and very cleverly. Then we had an Indian who dances, and an Indian fakir stopped a crowd of Europeans and performed the egg bag, the trick, the egg bag trick, and the Indian basket trick. In this scene, one of the snakes escapes and nearly bites one of the maids, who is saved by the priest, with whom she falls in love. Scene 2 is the interior of the temple of Siva, where priests and slaves are offering jewels, etc., to their god. The Raja enters on a pilgrimage to see the wonderful Blue Pearl, the eye of the god of Siva. He covets the pearl and determines to steal it. 2 British soldiers blunder into the temple and try to loot it, but they are surprised by the priests and slaves, who give chase to the soldiers. The Raja, finding the temple deserted, succeeds in stealing the pearl and escapes unseen. The priests returning, they notice the absence of the Blue Pearl and are distracted and appeal to the high priest, who goes into a trance and sees in a vision the enactment of the theft. Then he instructs the priest to follow the Raja, get into his service, and steal from him the pearl. In this scene, a cauldron emerges, huge with clouds of vapor, and on this, the vision is seen as on a lantern slide. Scene 3, the road to Behar. In this scene, there's a procession of animals and attendants, and the full strength of the company is seen, but there are no illusions. Scene 4, the borders of the sacred jungle. The Raja enters at the head of his caravan, and seeing, as he supposes, a roadside fakir, he demands to see his tricks. The fakir performs several tricks, including the rope trick. In this, the boy climbs the rope with the rapidity of a monkey. And as soon as he is out of sight, the rope falls to the ground, and the boy comes running from the back of the crowd who are watching the fakir. Then the Raja wishes life to be brought back to a skeleton of one of his favorite dancing girls. The skeleton at once becomes a beautiful girl and executes a graceful dance. The Raja is enraged and tries to kill the fakir, who, in his anger, causes the princess to disappear from a palanquin. And the priest snatches the pearl, but is discovered by the Raja, who orders his execution by having his head crushed beneath an elephant's foot. The slave girl, who loves him, pleads for his life, but to no purpose. The high priest, the fakir, at the last moment gives convincing proof of his powers and saves the priest. And the Raja, overcome with fear, gives up the pearl, which is restored to its proper place in Siva's eye. Scene 5. The king of Mysteria and his court are entertained in the palace of a famous illusionist who also uses his power to prevent the death of the king by a desperate anarchist who forces his way into the throne room. In this scene, SEARS comes on in an evening dress and performs his principal illusions. Next, we have an actual review of the show, which appeared in the pages of the Magical World periodical. This is from a performance at the Finsbury Park Empire Theater, February 13th, 1911. It says, "This stupendous and magnificent production, redolent of the Orient with all its fabled mystery, is by far the most superb magical spectacle ever witnessed on the variety stage of Europe. The cost must be enormous, detail perfection, stagecraft and setting beyond praise. Yet from a magical point of view, there's little here that we haven't seen SEARS do on his previous visits to England." In other words, they were really drawn into the spectacle and the production of the show, but he basically wrote a show around his old material. There really wasn't anything new. And I noticed in a couple other reviews as well, they sort of said the same thing. Audiences loved the show, but from the magician's point of view that had seen SEARS in previous visits to England, it was basically all the same material, just in a different packaging. I should point out, this is very important, most of the Magic Magazine articles always mentioned Mrs. SEARS. She had not only an important part in the show, but the magazines credit her with much of the success of the program. Around 1913, we see our last mention of Harry SEARS in the Magic magazines for several years. And this is sort of what I'm calling the dark period, as I'm not exactly sure what's going on, not exactly certain what he's doing. I've pieced together some things, but it's only a small glimpse into this time period. One major thing that took place was while he was in tour in England in 1910, his wife Edith gave birth to their son Desmond. And perhaps after returning to the United States, Harry scaled down the size of the show to keep working, but stayed closer to home to create some stability for the family. Now, in 1917, Harry registered for the draft for World War I. And here we find out some interesting information. First, he used his real name, Harry SEARS Knight, although he added in parentheses, known as Harry SEARS. His occupation says actor/producer, and under the place of employment, it says changes frequently due to working on different circuits. So he is apparently still performing in 1917, 1918, and living in the Bronx, but he doesn't appear anywhere on the 1920 census. So he may have been out of the country, or perhaps he was relocating and missed the census entirely. It wasn't until 1920 and then again in 1923 that his name appears in a Magic magazine, but this time not as a touring performer, but as a member of the Golden State SAM Assembly in California. So now he's moved from the East Coast to the West Coast. As late as 1924, SEARS still has an interest in magic, having visited the Thayer studios and sharing some of his recollections of being on the road back in the day. There's also a curious endorsement of a magic product by Harry SEARS in one of the Magic magazines, so we can assume he still has his notoriety. But what happened to him? The Sphinx magazine is the first to break the news, but they only give a really short paragraph with no details. Here's what happens. It seems that Harry SEARS, world-traveling illusionist, bought a gold mine, the old Victor mine. SEARS then incorporated a business and changed the name of the mine to the Calaveras Central Gold Mine, to be specific. and this was in 1926. Now, if you had asked me what magician purchased a gold mine in the 20th century, I might have said Thurston, but no, it was Harry Sears. And I can only assume he sold all the properties of his show along with the money he made over his short career performing and purchased a gold mine. Sure, why not? That's what everybody does, right? Now, during the 1930s, Sears became president of the Mining Association of California. In this position, he sued the state of California on a number of occasions over various disputes. At some point, he sold the gold mine and started a new business supplying the pipes needed for mining. This bit of information came from the 1930 U.S. Census. Up until that time, he was always listed as a gold mine owner or gold mine operator. Years later, in 1960, the Calaveras gold mine went up for sale, and Sears attempted to purchase it, but didn't have enough money to cover the back taxes. It appears a few months after trying to repurchase the Calaveras gold mine in 1960, Harry Sears passed away. That was on June 4th, 1961. In his newspaper obituary, there was no mention of Harry Sears ever having been a magician or even associated with it. It does record that he had his own mining company. Harry Sears Knight is buried in the Woodlawn Memorial Park in Colma, California, in San Mateo County. He was 75 when he passed away. Don't you wish at the end of your career you owned a gold mine? Wow. Well, that, my friends, is going to do it for this episode of the Magic Detective Podcast. If you happen to listen to the podcast on Apple Podcasts, please consider giving me a 5-star review. And by the way, thank you for the 2 folks who did that just recently. It all helps me in the rankings and the algorithm and all that stuff that I don't quite understand. Until next time, I'm Dean Carnegie. I am the Magic Detective. Be well and stay safe.